Okay, so in this video I'm going to be explaining how I modelled a 1967 Ford Shelby Mustang. Um, so first of all, a kind of disclaimer, a lot of the stuff in the video is actually just for visual purposes, like I wouldn't actually do half of these things, I'd have already researched them. So at the start I'm setting kind of plain values, and obviously here I'm Google searching the width, or the dimensions of the car, and I've already got these numbers kind of listed down, so this is just for one of those examples of a visual kind of aid. um, but yeah, so start off by kind of having a plane offset from the width of the car, well, half the width of the car. um, so you start working on the outside panel, the furthest panel away on the body. I'll get to that shortly. um, yeah. Okay, so here I'm just expanding a plane to make it more convenient for me to work on. So to begin, you have to insert an image. You need to find an image, and you don't want one that's got kind of a weird zoom, like a crazy fisheye. You want something that's almost like a very far away, so there's not much perspective on the drawing. So I've already found one. This is me in my folder. So I go through to the car I want. I find the image, and here's the side on view of the Mustang. So first thing, it just kind of comes on screen. I flip it around to the way I want it, and then you have to do something called calibrating the image. So by knowing the dimensions of the car, what you can do is you pick on the front point of the car. So here again I'm showing you the kind of numbers, but what I'm going to do is I'll click a point on the front of the car and on the rear of the car and enter the length of the car, and by doing that it will automatically scale this image. So putting in the number there, and now that on my computer is at full scale. I could work in a tiny scale, but it's just easier for me, because once you know that, you can kind of find out tire dimensions and things, so you don't have to try and estimate them off the image. So by doing it like 1 to 1, it makes everything a lot easier. I should also mention that a lot of this stuff is done a lot slower because my laptop's 3-4 years old, and it's not got the biggest processor in the world. So by actually capturing everything, it actually slowed down my process. So now we're ready to go into the kind of mold sculpt workspace, I think. Yeah, just flipping it around to the way I want it. So here I am entering the workspace, the sculpt workspace. First of all, there are many kind of ways you can do it, but I want to select plane like I've just have. Place that on here. So you click it once and then you drag out and you basically create a center rectangle, and you can enter on the right hand side how many panel like sections. Here I've just got 2 vertical and 2 horizontal for a combined total of 4. So immediately I'm straight on it. What I'm trying to do is, with the lines on the edges of each of those little sections, I'm trying to line them up with a certain part of the car, a certain feature. For example, that crease that runs along the side of the car. What I'm aiming to do is get that center edge to line up with it, and it's quite I don't know, quite difficult. If I just quickly talk you through what I've done there, while pressing the Alt key, you can drag the sections, and it will add a new section. So at first it was a 2x2, and then it became a 3x2, and that was by clicking the arrow and dragging, but before doing that, holding the Alt key. And you can also hold Control Alt to do the same thing, but there are subtle differences between what they do. If you're grabbing a whole like length of a line from the like bottom two corners, you won't notice it. But say you were selecting, I don't know, just one little line on one little section, you held the Alt key, it actually warps the other squares, whereas if you press the Control with the Alt key, you just create a new kind of section on its own. I might be able to show that in another video. But here, try and line up those edges. That's kind of the goal for throughout the process of this, is lining up the edges of each little section with a feature on the car. It's important to know that you want as few of these lines as possible, because you can create so many lines, and it can be so accurate, but what will happen is, well, it'll slow your computer down, but also cars in general, especially in this era, they're not computer generated. They're sculpted kind of like by sketches and by hand, so in their design stage anyway. And what that means is you want like these long curves, something called tensioning curves, which a lot of car manufacturers pretty much follow, and have been following forever. So by having like longer sections, bigger sections, you create tension on these curves. If you have lots of tiny little sections, there's no tension, and then it just doesn't look right. Yeah. Feel free to mute this, because I'm I don't know what to say. I'm just kind of trying to explain it as it goes. So here, dragging down to the bottom, and kind of lining it up with more features. What I'm also going to do with this side panel, I don't want it to reach the top of that windowsill or the bottom of the car. Well, I can come close to the bottom of the car. I might even come down to it, but at the top of the car, because I want to create a curve, if I come right to the edges on the image, so say if I went to the top of the bonnet up in the top right hand corner, and then when I kind of pulled it towards the center, it would look completely bizarre. It would look very square. So you kind of layer it, kind of like, it's a good way to describe it. There's a game that you can play as a kid where there are like discs stacked, and the discs are like bigger and smaller, and you're not allowed to put a smaller disc, not allowed to put a bigger disc on top of a smaller disc, and you've got to move them like from this post on the left to this post on the right, and there's one post in the middle, and that kind of like gradient on those separate layers is, I think that makes a lot of sense. Explanations aren't really my strong suit, but yeah, just kind of dragging it to these features is important. Let's see anything else. Yeah, so just lining up the approximate major sections of the car. That's kind of the goal at this stage. There's a lot of tinkering later on. So yeah, just to get it going, remember, you click on the create, you click plane, you draw the little plane, you'll have 4 sections, or you can add more, and then you click modify, and then you get this kind of tool come up, and that's how you modify each bit. At the kind of at the time when I first released this, I think this would have been about the 10th Surface model I'd done. So not like a lot. I haven't done too many since. Not not that I couldn't. I've just been experimenting with a lot of tools on Fusion. They've got a really great kind of tutorial uh, thing that they run, and I watch a lot of their tutorials. So here is an example where I'm creating new sections. I'm holding Alt to create those new sections. But yeah, no. Fusion has an amazing kind of lesson tutorial sort of system, and I mean, there's a lot of them, which is fantastic. I mean, it'll take you ages to get through, but I've been slowly going through them, and this was after I did a surface model of a reciprocating saw, which they do in one of their lessons. This was kind of all stuff learnt from that. I mean, my CAD background is actually SolidWorks. I learned SolidWorks maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago, and I was doing it for at least 6 years. So from school, I was very fortunate. In our school, it was free, and same at university where I studied product design. SolidWorks was free then, but since finishing, like, I could get a crack of it and use that, but I wanted to try out Fusion 360. So just, yeah, just in case you weren't sure, this is Fusion 360, and it is a ridiculously great program, considering like a hobbyist license. It's what I use. It's free, and you're pretty much open to use everything on it. Same for a startup license. If you're part of a startup company, I think it's like if you earn less than 100k a year on a startup license, it's still free, which is just mad. But even the full license is, I think it's £300 a year. So, I mean, compared to things like SolidWorks and other CAD programs I've used before, I mean, that is insane for what it is. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is amazing. Like, really, really good. So here, like, by pinching those corners, I can create the curves. But at the moment, this whole kind of plane I'm working on is completely flat. There's no depth from side to side on the car. It's just like a sheet, and I will get to that. But you can see how I'm not taking it right to the edge, and that's because, like I said before, that game I played as a kid, you kind of layer it out. You kind of create a new layer, and that goes deeper. It becomes more clear when I start to do that. But yeah, how are we getting on? I mean, this, I would say this like modeling isn't that difficult. It's quite time consuming. 6 hours isn't too bad though. I mean, the end result is not perfect. It's not like 100% accurate. It's, it was an experiment to see how close I could get in a day, really. I mean, I could have carried on going for longer, but like after 6 hours at your computer, you do tend to get a bit bored. So yeah, just kind of dragging it up to those curves. I mean, the odd thing about this project, like kind of the weird things were the amount of hiccups I reached after modelling this in the surface area. So after taking it out of the surface area, then go on to do some normal procedures like extruding things, and I kind of ignore the general rules for that, which is, firstly, when you model in the normal workspace, when you're like sketching, you should always constrain everything, you should always dimension everything. Nothing should be able to be moved. It should all be perfectly stationary, and I totally ignored that because I just wanted to. This wasn't like I say, 100% accurate. It was just kind of what my eye was telling me where things should go, and I couldn't be arsed to do all the constraining.